This is Duke University.
I'm Lou Brown with the Forum for Scholars and Publics. On behalf of our team and today's co-sponsor, the Power Plant Gallery, I want to welcome you to Photography as Collaboration, a conversation with Titus Brooks Higgins. We miss seeing everyone in person, and we know the isolation during these troubling and troubled times can make everything feel heavier. We want to say we're grateful for your presence for this virtual conversation and your contribution to our community. We really appreciate you being here with us today, and we're holding you all in our thoughts always, even when we're not together. Because Titus and Jane have been very thoughtful and intentional about crafting today's program, the majority of our time will be devoted to the two of them in conversation. We anticipate there will be time for a few questions at the end, so if you do have a question, please type it in the chat, and we appreciate your understanding if we don't get to all of your questions. Now to introduce our moderator, Dr. Jane Ifekwunyigwe. She's Associate Director of Engagement for the Center for Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, and Senior Research Scholar at the Center on Genomics, Race, Identity, and Difference at Duke University. Holding doctorate and master's degrees in medical anthropology and biomedical ethics, her scholarly and teaching interests are interdisciplinary and are guided by the lyrical power of both storytelling and visual texts. Her research areas include comparative mixed race identities and family memories, the gendered and generational politics of global African diasporas, visualizing cultural and heritage tourisms in urban spaces, as well as more recently, the medical anthropology of race, mixed race, and genomics. She has conducted visual and ethnographic research in the United States, the United Kingdom, and South Africa, and has published and presented her work widely. Today, she is going to be our very able moderator for this discussion, and I'm now going to turn it over to her, and she will introduce Titus to everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Lou. Greetings, everyone. And first of all, I must say thank you so much to Lou, Caitlin, and Eliza for inviting me to participate in this wonderful conversation. Titus and I have already had several incredible and engaging exchanges, and I'm just excited to be sharing some of our thoughts with you, and I'm looking forward to your being able to see just a little bit of the breadth and depth of his body of work. And it's nice to see so many familiar faces on Zoom, including my 89-year-old, almost 89-year-old mother who's Zooming in from Petersburg, Virginia. Hello, Mom. So as I said, Titus and I have had some wonderful phone exchanges and very quickly realized that we had some shared connections, including turning points and detours that led in some respects to his coming, and forgive me, Titus, for taking this liberty, becoming an accidental photographer. I call myself an accidental anthropologist because there's a backstory as to how I ended up in anthropology and not medicine. And then the other element that connected us really was this way in which the work that we do is intimately entangled with our lives and our life journeys. And so that really was very gratifying to me, to see the extent to which there was this incredible connection between Titus's work and mine, in the sense that and then there are real parallels between sort of ethnography and anthropology and photography. Titus Brooks Higgins is a photographer who currently lives and works in Durham, North Carolina. He has traveled extensively throughout North Carolina, the Southwestern United States, Mexico, Cuba, Haiti, the Caribbean, China, and beyond, as we had some wonderful conversations about his experiences on the continent, to produce a diverse body of work on the African continent, I should say. He holds a BA in political science from Duke University and an MFA in photography from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. He has taught photography and art history courses at numerous colleges and universities, including the Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, the Durham Arts Council, and the Duke Center for Documentary Studies. Higgins is adept at capturing the full emotional and cultural spectrum of diverse communities with a photographic practice rooted in and dedicated to the expressive documentary tradition. His works are in many private and public collections, including the North Carolina Museum of Art, Anacostia Museum of African American Art and History, Smithsonian Institute, Washington, D.C., Lehigh University Museum of Art, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, North Carolina Central Museum of Art, Durham, North Carolina, and Casa de Africa, Havana, Cuba. Over to you, Titus.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. It's always sort of difficult for me to figure out how I want to start. So I'll just start saying that primarily I'm a portraitist, and I consider at the core of my work documenting and creating visual expressions of the descendants of Africa who live in the Western Hemisphere. My work is very much tied to my experiences as a young African American growing up in both Chicago and Houston, Texas. Those experiences hold a tremendous amount of weight on the way that I photograph people. And it's primarily because I grew up in a poor African American neighborhood. So I'm very sensitive to the way that people of less means are visually categorized by this tremendous industry that we call photography. I think that unfortunately that the media is dominated by people who have considerably more access, power, and wealth, considering who they actually photograph. So those are some of the things that I really take into consideration whenever I'm entering into a situation where I'm taking a portrait of someone. So I am sort of this accidental photographer, and I started being a photographer. I was called to be a photographer, I guess, in the late 90s. And it was after I took a group of Duke students and some Durham High School students to the World Youth Festival in Havana, Cuba. I was fortunate enough to meet this man and his family on that first trip. This is Iran Murago, and he and his wife had requested a married couple stay with them during the festival. And out of thousands of Americans who went to that event, Maureen and I, who was my wife, we were the only married couple that was in the entire group. So we were sort of we were taken and pretty much adopted by Hiran and his wife Amelia, and we lived with them because I made subsequent trips to Cuba that year and the next year. But we began living with them each time that we went to Cuba, and we lived with them for over 15 years. And it wasn't until they retired and they moved to Spain that we've stopped visiting them in Cuba. But of course, after they left Cuba, we visited, their children that were there, and also other people, family members that we had met on those experiences that were related to them. And let's see. This is Amelia. She is the wife of Hiran. And this is the other part of the family that we live with for 15 years. Important thing about this couple is that they were part of what's called the Community in Defense of the Revolution, which is a group of Cubans who are and were very loyal to the Castro regime. The interesting thing about them is that after the revolution, they both went into the mountains and taught people how to read and write. And that was one of the most amazing things that I found about my experiences in Cuba was the amazing literacy rate. They had a 97% literacy rate on that island, which is, and I think that in this country, ours is somewhere below 40 or 50%. So they're doing a substantially better job than what we are. A lot of my photography is about extended relationships. I like to spend time with people, get to know them, get to know who they are, get to know things about their family, as much as I can about their experiences. One such person that I photographed for an exhibition that I did at Meredith College, which was called Desire and Otherness, which was about people who were other. I photographed Nikki, and Nikki is albino. And I met her one evening in a restaurant, And I just knew I had to photograph her for this body of work that I was creating for the exhibition. Now, I started photographing Nikki and in her family about 12 years ago. I still photograph them to today. We have become so close that our families have just sort of merged. I've taken even cousins of mine who visited me, and when we've gone to family celebrations, also family funerals, and that's pretty much the way that I like to work. I like to know as much about the people that I photograph as is possible. Now, unfortunately, all of my portraits, I don't have those sort of opportunities. But what I try to do is I do try to make certain that I come back and I photograph people more than once at least for each person that I'm creating a portrait of. One of my favorite images now is a photograph that I took of her nephews, and still doing that. There we go. And this is Xavier and Chris. I really like photographing African-American men and young boys. And it's because that in this society that we live, Black males are thought of as being dangerous. There are all of these negative connotations. And I like to photograph people. One, I make large prints. So there is this element of anytime my photographs are viewed, that there's this sort of confrontation element between the sitter and the viewer. And I do this because I think that in America, we are not used to Black people speaking and being present. And so I like to have this confrontation, because what it does for me is that it sort of says that we are taking the space, we own the space, we are supposed to be here. And these young men, I think, personify those issues that I try to bring out within my photography. This is a group of men that I photographed. This isn't far from where I live. On the screen's right is the patriarch of the family, and he is called 6-0. And these other two young men are his sons. And I really love this photograph because it reminds me of the young men that I grew up with in my neighborhood. This is essentially how we walked around every day. We were shirtless, we were young, we had nice bodies. It was, we were beautiful. And I remember the guys that I grew up with and thinking about just essentially how beautiful they were. And bringing these things out in my photography today is one of the very important things that I believe that I do, because I want to create a different sort of narrative about how we look, when we look, where we look, and to say that we are still beautiful in all of our Blackness and in the spaces that we occupy. And also, I like to talk about the characters of the people that I photograph. 6-0 is one of the few African Americans in East Durham who actually owns his own house. And most of the houses in this area are rented, except for now the neighborhood is being gentrified. And of course, all of the, the middle and upper middle class whites that are moving in, they own the houses. But typically the poor Blacks, the poor Latinos, and even the poor whites didn't own their house. They were rental houses. But he owns his house. It looks smaller than what it actually is. That's not his house, it's in the background. But he has enough room in his house where he has 3 generations of his family living with him. So his older son lives with him, his older son and his wife, and they have 2 children. And it's just, it's an amazing family, and it's an amazing amount of care. And what I've seen 6-0 exhibiting with his family. And I do believe that he is one of the kinds of Black men that I think that more should be like. I love this photograph of him and his sons.
Titus, before we go on to the next.
Yes.
Oh, no, actually, I'd forgotten. Please, after the next image, I'd like to jump in
one.
and have a chat. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is Sixo's son and granddaughter. His son Kevin, and of course, one other aspect of my work is I photograph a lot in the ink community, and he has one of these memorial tattoos that's about a brother of his who's no longer with us, unfortunately.
Thank you so much, Titus. As I shared with you, these images are striking. And I think that the first thing that I noticed in looking not only at Iran and Amelia, whom you've known, for a long time, as well as Nikki and Xavier and Chris, is the softness in their eyes and the intimacy that is really palpable and felt in terms of the relationship between you as the photographer and they as collaborators. And I wondered if you could talk about what you call visual trust and how this developing of visual trust with your collaborators as you're photographing them, really results in these beautiful images that really, kind of evoke the sense in which people just feel seen, feel seen by you.
Well, the people that I photograph for periods of time, it's sort of difficult, I think, to photograph people in a negative way that you've shared a meal with, that you've been invited to your home, that they've stayed at your home and you've visited them. And so this is one of the aspects of my photography, in that as I photograph people, I not only go to their homes, but I also bring them into my house. As far as with Sixo and his sons, one of the photographs of Sixo and his sons was exhibited at the National Museum. Let's see, about 2 years ago. And, I made it a point that he and his family came to the museum and saw their images in the museum. And it was absolutely amazing how this man, as he's standing by his portrait, and I remember there were these two older women who were coming by looking at it and stopped. And he turned to me and he said, "That's me." And there was such pride, in his heart. But not only that, but it's the fact for me of creating an image where it was shared in this prominent museum, and that he was a part of it, bringing him into the museum. So we're talking about changing who goes into these spaces. And those are things that just absolutely, it needs to happen. Many times photographers photograph in these communities, but the people that they photograph rarely come to the spaces where they're exhibited. They rarely become a part of the dialogue about the image. They rarely understand the importance of what this photograph means. And more importantly, they rarely get to see themselves in a beautiful and positive way, and I think that's something that as photographers, because we're given a lot by Sixo, and I think that what we need to do, we need to make certain that we do something about giving back. Another one of the aspects of how I give back is that for everyone that I create a portrait for, I make certain that they get a copy of a print. And I'll send prints all over the US if I'm traveling, or sometimes in different places in the world. But I make certain that I give something back. I try not to just take. And certain people that I have built up relationships with, I do things to help out. There was this one woman that I photographed in Mississippi, and her family was having this real hard time. Her daughter had died of cancer, and she was taking care of her 5 grandchildren. And a woman saw the photograph posted on Instagram and read the text about her life story and about her situation, and wrote me and asked me if she could help the family. So, I said yes. So I was this in-between person that created, so she bought clothes. She, gave them money for food. I mean, just various things. So I try to make certain that it's not simply about my being in a space, taking a photograph and creating an image and taking it somewhere else and using it just for that. Because I think that the people that I photograph, that they give a lot and they deserve something back for it.
Thank you. I'm sure you want to share more.
Yeah, I'm getting to that, there we go. So this is a food market that's about a block and a half from where 60 lives. And as we can see, it's one of these markets where there's mostly high fructose sodas are sold, beer, they do lottery, milk and bread, but there's no healthy food there. And, we talk about the ideas of these food deserts that are in Black communities. And fortunately, there's beginning to be some talk about environmental racism, about the negative impact of people where these neighborhoods fall victim to bad things happening to the environment, lead poisonings and etc. And those things are very, very important that we should pay attention to. And I think that when I do these sort of urban landscapes, so these are, many of the things that I try to photograph. I did a series of liquor stores in Detroit, in Black neighborhoods, and where there were no grocery stores, but just almost every other block, there was this amazing building, this huge, space that's just selling just all liquor and just nothing else. And, but people have to travel for miles to get a loaf of bread or to get, some vegetables or etc. In photographing East Durham, it's impossible for you to ignore the poor whites and Latinos that live in the areas. In many respects, their lives are very similar to the African Americans who live there. This is Ashley. I started photographing Ashley somewhere in about 2009 or so. And I believe I stopped photographing her family. I lost touch with her and her family in about 2015, I believe it was. And one of the reasons is because they moved so often. One year that I photographed her, they moved within a 12-month period, they moved 6 times. And I think that she was in about the 9th grade during that period. If you can imagine moving about 6 or 7 times when you're in the 9th grade, changing schools, the uprooting your family and etc. She lived in a house that was also multi-generational. In photographing her, I was able to branch out and photograph other members in her family. This is Tammy, who was related to her. And Tammy had a really, really horrible story. When she was about 20, her younger sister, who at the time was 16, was in a bar in East Durham, and someone started shooting and she was shot and she was paralyzed. She was a paraplegic for the remainder of her life. About 2 weeks after that, Tammy's father was shot because he was trying to find out what happened to his daughter. And he felt that the Durham Police Department was not doing enough or a sufficient job to investigate who had injured his daughter. He was killed. So literally it was Tammy and her mother who were left to care for the daughter. Tammy was responsible for getting her sister to medical appointments and etc. And because of that, she lost her job at the mills. She was working at one of, I believe, hosiery mills in Durham. And so she used, as a recourse, she began working the streets. And it was after several conversations with her and photographing her for about almost a year that I decided to do another body of work that's called Small Town Girls. And it's where I photograph women who were working the streets in in towns such as Durham and throughout North Carolina. And I wanted to get their stories about how they came to do the work, what was their life like, in doing this work, and what were the measures that they were taking to trying to, get out of doing this work.
If I could jump in before we move
Sure.
to the next series, Titus,
Sure.
if you wouldn't mind going back to Tammy. As we talked about a great deal, I believe it was yesterday, that, I think this is a thread that runs through all of your work, really, this idea of producing counter narratives, through
Yes.
the images of popular and conventional representations of our communities. And I love the fact that you shared with me that not only do you document their lives and allow them to tell their stories, through the images, but that you also have done a series of videos, where they're in their own words able to tell their story. Because I think that, there's a way in which sex work has been politicized and it's still very much racialized. So there's this notion that we call it sex work because it's a choice. We have agency. Right. This is something that we want to do. And, right. Of course, yesterday we had a conversation about those who don't have choice. And this is subsistence work. They do it because they have to. It's a survival mechanism. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, I've got this one video where I was talking to a young African-American woman that was working in Durham. And she talked about how she had moved from Eastern North Carolina to Durham, looking for a better life, and was working. And she lost two of her children. Two of her children died. And she talked about the only way that she could deal with, the impact that the death of those two kids had on her was that she turned to drugs. And she never used drugs before in her life. And so she was really, really victimized by that. And to support her drug habits, she couldn't find a job where she made enough money to do that. So she started working the streets. And it was just a tearful explanation of how she got to where she was. I remember one night another young woman that I'd photographed for about 3 years, and I finally got her to my house, and because she hadn't eaten in about 3 days, and I said, come on, let's just go home with me. So my wife and I, we were about to have dinner. I knew we were about to have dinner, so I just brought her in to the house, and so we were talking, and I started video, and she was talking, and she said to me, she said, "You're the only friend that I have." And I looked at her, and I'm thinking, this is someone that, I may see once every 2 months, something like that. But she says, "You're the only person that has exhibited any kind of kindness, to me." And it was, just was really touching. It was just, just amazing. And she went on and she elaborated, and I understood what she meant, So yeah, I think that it's important that while we photograph, while we do this work, that we also try to do as much good as we can with the people that we're photographing. Let's see, go on. There we go. Another area of my work is I photograph people with ink, and I really love this work. There's something that I believe is spiritual about the use of tattoos in the African American community. Many of the tattoos for people, they're about protection. They're also paying homage to people that they've known and loved that have gone on. But that I think that for African Americans, that there is a clear direct linkage to this with African scarification, and with tattoos, that come from the continent. And there's a place that I work in. It's called the Inkwell. It's on North Roxborough Road. And I've been photographing in the Inkwell for about 12 years now. And I'm fortunate that the owner, a guy named Mike, is interested in photography. So he just, he's always let me come in whenever I want to and do just whatever I want, just whatever. So I photographed, this is a young woman, her name is Bubbles, she's called Bubbles. I particularly like this image because it reminds me of the Madonna. And who says that Madonna has to always be portrayed as someone who's white? I mean, why not a black or brown, Madonna? And why not one that's in East Durham? And with her head in the center of this rim, it gives this idea of this halo, over her, and with her hair, with the colors, and with the wings, that she's got on her chest, and the gold necklace, and the tattoos on her face. I mean, it's just it's a beautiful image. I absolutely love it. And this is Ben. Ben is a young man that I've known for quite a while, and Ben is a tattoo artist himself. His brother owns a tattoo parlor in Fayetteville, and Ben is pretty much fully covered with tattoos. He's very much into guns, which is an interesting aspect of his life. I really love the way that Ben does his hair. I mean, there's just all of these things that are about him that I think that are just absolutely beautiful and wonderful. And Ben was working at a veterinarian's office, and he wanted to be a vet tech. And he's a very kind, very gentle young man. It's just that if you see Ben and his personality, your visual, what you think about people with tattoos, it's a counter to that. If you sit and you talk to him for 30 seconds, not even 5 minutes, you'll just find an amazing person.
Just before you move on, Titus,
Sure.
to the next series, I'm really glad that you brought up the link between the motherland, the African continent, and the diaspora, because I think, these expressive traditions, there's a direct line, in terms of the African retentions surviving and thriving and being reinterpreted in the African diaspora, as opposed to other notions that say that the Middle Passage was such a violent enterprise that nothing really survived, and anything that we see in the African diaspora is new and invented. And I think it's very clear, both in the hair, as we talked about in a lot of your images, just the variety of hairstyles and how they echo hairstyles you would find on the continent, but as well, as you said, about the African scarification and inking as being, different parts of the same, in terms of having different purposes, whether to memorialize, as you said, or to beautify the body, or to mark particular rites of passage, be they birth or death or marriage or puberty, moving from one life stage to another.
That's right. Well, I believe in the idea of race memory. I do believe that there are things that are retained, that go with us, that come to us as we are born into this world, and those are connections that our foreparents, our forefathers, things about their experiences that are so deeply rooted within their soul, within their being, and this is whether or not you're a religious person or not, but I really do think that these things are transferred, and there are things that we do, and we don't understand why are we doing that, and that's everyone, no matter who you are. And we say, well, this is just the way that I'm going to do things, and you don't know where the origin of this is, and it's all a part of the race memory that we have. Now, I do believe that the descendants of Africa that much of that in the West, that there's been a real attempt, to destroy that, to make certain that those memories, that those things, those expressions, have not been allowed. And I do believe that since within the past, say maybe 20 years or 50 years, maybe we'll just say it for a long, that many of those things are being able to come out now. Those expressions, issues about Black hair, up until, let's say, probably the early 70s, when the culture required you to wear your hair a certain way. But now those things are relaxed. And I think that as those things are relaxed, meaning particularly by pushback by African Americans, and by us understanding and saying, wait a minute, this is where I am. This is what my hair is like. And, I'm just not going to do those things. And I think that as the courts have begun to realize that that places can't require certain codes of dress, and hair is a dress expression. So I think that many of us will connect more with these notions of race memory, of about how we visually express ourselves in day-to-day life. One of the other aspects of my photography has to do with spiritual expressions. I began, actually, my real photography, my first body of work was called Dark Hollowed Ground, which was a study of African American cemeteries, started in North Carolina, throughout the US. Then I went to Canada, photographing the towns that were started by escaped and runaway slaves. And then I went to the Caribbean and eventually to Brazil to photograph those spaces. So from photographing in cemeteries, I sort of backed up and went into the churches. And as I started photographing experiences, but photographing funerals is one of the favorite things that I do. I absolutely love to photograph funerals, because as I was growing up, the funerals of my grandmother's generation, her sisters and brothers, were the things of where I first experienced loss. And that left a tremendous impact on me, because funerals are a special expression in African American communities. And so there's something about photographing a funeral that takes me back to when I was 9 years old and my favorite uncle died. And I mean, I can still remember the church. I can still actually, in my mind, remember the smell of the flowers, that were surrounding the casket. So photographing a funeral is something that's quite dear to my heart. And it's an amazingly beautiful expression of African American life, and it's also this narrative about death, which is something that we don't talk about, and especially now during this period, I think it's really important, because as we are witnessing 500,000 people dying in this country from COVID, but we have not had the opportunities to begin to heal, because the funeral it's a way of beginning on this path of healing, from this loss. And so I don't know, maybe that may be one of the reasons that there's so many terrible things that are happening in the country right now, is that we aren't healing from all of this loss. And it's not within our visual realm for most of us.
Thank you, Titus. Before we move on to your last series, I just want to chime in really in terms of really seeing a connection between your inking series and your church and funeral series, in the sense that in the Black community historically, particularly those who were formerly enslaved, that Black churches formed an important emancipatory role
Yes.
in terms of bestowing dignity, and in certain instances teaching people to read, or in certain instances through the songs, that there was liberation, kind of encoded in the hymns, so that
right.
it is and was kind of central to life in Black communities, as it is for those who are Christian on the continent. So I want to keep going back to making that connection between those of us in the global African diaspora and those on the African continent.
Yeah, and as I've traveled throughout the diaspora, photographing in cemeteries, there's such similarities in the way that we bury our people. I remember I was in Barbados, and there was a cemetery that was way off into the countryside, and it had this bed, this wrought iron bed that was over the grave. And as I approached this, it just reminded me of the cemetery in this town that's about 30 miles from Durham, where I saw the same thing. And and you just say, oh my gosh, I'm in Brazil, and this is what I saw in North Carolina. And you just that you just realize, yeah, it's the same thing. It's the same connection. It's the same people coming from the same experience and the same expression. It's just there. I like to photograph in photographing churches. This image is called Spank's Glory Walk, and anyone that's been to what I'll say is a real African American church, where the Spirit moves people to get up and express themselves. It's the image. It's the truth. It's what it is. This is the truth. It's an absolutely beautiful image. I love this one. I love the expression. I love the exhilaration that Spank, and that's the woman's name, who's doing the walk. It's amazing. It's just amazing. I love it. I love it. So during the pandemic, this is what I've been doing. So I've been photographing the Black Lives Movement. I've been or at least I was photographing the Black Lives Movement, and I was photographing the Open Up North Carolina movement at the governor's mansion and across the street in Raleigh. But I tried to do it differently because I thought that there were just enough photographs of people marching and people with their fists, in the air, and screaming and yelling at each other. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to just do it in a way with just portraits that spoke to more about who they were and what they were trying to say. This image is from Washington. I think I did this. This was last June. I think it was when I photographed this woman. But I saw her walking, and I had to photograph her. It was just, I loved the T-shirt. I loved her expression. The way she expressed herself. I thought that was amazing. This is at one of the Open Up North Carolina rallies, and I was particularly interested in this image because I had just come from DC, where President Trump had walked across the street, moved people out of the way, to hold the Bible up in front of the church. And so this man was essentially doing something very similar. And I wanted to do a portrait of that. I love that. So when I'm not doing this kind of work, what I'd like to do is I like to go out to the Southwest, to Utah and northern and eastern Arizona, and photograph landscapes. And so I just kind of get lost out there, and I go out and I just stay for days, and I come back about a week later, and that's that's my downtime.
Titus, thank you so much. And to the audience, we have time now, about 10 minutes or so, for anyone who would like to ask a question and can do so in the chat. Otherwise, Titus and I can keep talking.
Yeah, sure. I don't know, so.
Well, thank you, Titus, for giving us just a sample of your rich and extensive and broad body of work. Okay. Yes. I'd like to attempt to sort of draw threads, some more threads in terms of what I see as commonalities across these different series. I mean, I think the first one clearly, and I think you've already talked about this, is how important it is to make visible and seen those who have been rendered both invisible and unseen and othered. And clearly through these images, you, as I said, bestow a certain dignity and respect to those, as you say, who are frequently not seen, or if they're seen and represented, it's in a way that really attempts, to objectify, criminalize, and really not, connect them to this idea that we talk about a lot at the Center for Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, which is our common humanity. We in the long run are all one, but we forget that in terms of these divisions and these tensions across lines of difference and sameness.
So, one of the things that that I always think about is that, so I guess I consider myself sort of middle class, and I say sort of middle class, but because of where I live and where I work, I see myself as falling victim to many of the things that 6-0 and his family are victims of. As a matter of fact, one day as I was going to photograph in East Durham, I was stopped by the police with guns drawn on me, and they just assumed that I was up to no good, and
Titus, did we lose you?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, but can you still hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. So as I was going to photograph, there was a police car behind me. I had to make a right turn to go in the direction I was going, and I was stopped by the police, gun drawn. One policeman on the driver's side with his gun partially out, another one at my rear window with the gun pointed at my head. And it's the very fact that I realized that my life is very much the same as as many of the people that I photograph, and that also forces me to photograph them in ways where I have to visually portray them with some sort of understanding about who they are in their lives, and also to try to make certain that they are presented in ways that are beautiful. Because as I'm looking at, when I talk about looking at 6-0 and his kids, I think about how I was when I was growing up, and what I looked like, what my friends looked like, what the people that I trusted, with my life as we walked down the street, for whatever reasons. And so as I'm photographing, I'm always thinking about that. And that's very important to me.
There is a lot of chatter in the chat room, chat box, Titus, that I'd like to just share with you. It's mostly affirmations more than actual questions. So I'd just like to, at this point, just to share some of them with you. Just beautiful images. Someone else said agree. Someone else said, will we be able to see such an exhilarating exhibit and narrative again anytime soon? And that's from Cynthia. I've loved every second of this session. Thank you so much for sharing these powerful images and especially the thoughts and processes behind them. I love the stories of the people you photograph. Your work feels wonderfully thematic. Is work with Alzheimer's ever a subject in any of your work? I don't know if you
I'm
want
sorry,
to
is
pause,
work-
want to pause and respond to that one. Someone wanted to know, is work with Alzheimer's ever a subject, and
Oh,
Alzheimer's, those
no,
living with Alzheimer's ever your collaborators?
I have, the only thing that I've really done with health is that I began a portion of work about women with mastectomies a couple of years ago, and I never completed it. But as far as my work that's coming up in the future that people can see, in the fall, I'll have a pretty large exhibition of my work within the transgender community in Cuba. That will be at the Contemporary Art Museum in Raleigh, and it should go on for for a couple of months there. And I hope people will come out to that.
Wonderful, thank you. Another comment, your work is inspiring and powerful. Have always enjoyed your approach to people. Thanks for the session. Compassion comes through so strongly in your work, and this comment, I want to call out another member of our TRHT team, Leslie Lewis, and I keep talking about these mirrors and echoes in terms of the themes and practices, intentional practices in your work, Titus, and the work we're doing at the Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. We're a national, part of a national movement, and our mission is to dismantle the belief in belief in a hierarchy of human value based on race, and also to enlarge the circles of engagement of those willing to work towards transformation. But in terms of how we do the work, we really practice what we call an ethics of care and compassion. And what Leslie was sharing here was how that same ethics of care and compassion comes through in your work and your work with your collaborators, and how you engage and sustain relationships and build relationships with them. So she said, compassion comes through so strongly in your work. Someone else said, really powerful. I think that's Annabelle, my one of the PhD students from the UK, who's actually in Dominica at the moment, with whom I've worked. Greetings, Annabelle. Really powerful. I love how your use of photography helps you to build and maintain relationships with those you collaborate with. Thanks for sharing. And then this question, I don't know, this is a question from an audience member. This question might sound bad, but does Titus think that white people who are not aware of racial issues have the sensitivity to understand the depth of his work?
Yeah, yes, I do believe that. We live in a world that's clearly racialized, but one of the things that I know is that it would be virtually impossible for African Americans to have made any sort of racial gains in this country without the support of whites. I do believe that there are certain things that during the civil rights movement that just made dramatic turns where the movement could make progress. And I think that many of those turns involve things with whites. I do believe that people in all races suffer many of the things because of the types of systems that we have. I do think that unless we figure out ways to understand that we are brothers, that none of us will survive, in this. So yeah. So most definitely. Oh gosh, yeah.
And I'm conscious of the time, so unfortunately we won't be able to get to any more questions or comments. But I just once again wanted to thank the hosts, really, of this wonderful gathering, Lou and Caitlin and Eliza, and of course Titus, who brought us all together. And I'm hoping, Titus, there'll be other opportunities for you and I to collaborate. And I think your work clearly speaks to the power of art, not only to communicate, but to heal and restore. So thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Thank you
And
very
thank
much.
you to all of you for spending your lunchtime with us.
Yes, that's right. Thanks for everyone for coming. And of course, thanks again for your comments, about the work. So, yeah. And come see my opening at CAM in the fall, so yeah. So please do that if you're local.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.